Welcome to Oklahoma Voice. This is Jonathan Clour, and I want to thank you so much for tuning in tonight. We've got a very informative program for you. And as Veterans Day approaches, we think about sacrifice as a nation and how our nation has uh, uh, created itself into the powerful structure that it is today. And it couldn't have been without the sacrifice of our military men and women, without the sacrifice of our forefathers as well. And tonight we want to express thanks and dedicate part of this program this evening to all of those that have made a sacrifice. So this evening I have Regina Hoff sitting in the studios with me. My,
Jonathan.
my faithful co-host. Good evening, Regina. So great seeing you tonight.
It's great to be here. I'm excited for this right now.
Yeah, we are very thrilled to be able to kick our program off. And Oklahoma Voice has been an idea that I wanted to get on air for such a long time. And we are extremely thankful that the opportunity has come through KTLV Studios, which is radio, whose radio programming is 1220 a.m. And there's a few other ways that you can listen to our show, and that is at KTLV.com. And you simply click on live streaming at KTLV.com. Or if you have a smart device, you can download the TuneIn Radio app, and then you can click on that app. And then in the bar at the very top of your screen, you enter in KTLV, push enter, and then it will bring up the radio station. It'll say KTLV 1220, and then you push play. And then you can tune in with us every Monday through Friday night at 7 p.m.
Yes, we look forward to hearing from all of you.
Yes, and so in later shows, we will be accepting calls. And we're going to line up so many fantastic guests. We're going to really be lining up the shakers and movers here in Oklahoma, from state elected officials in the legislature to other folks that are perhaps significant in the church.
Yeah.
So we're going to cover Oklahoma's issues from many angles. My vision with Oklahoma Voice was this, that Oklahoma needed a program that would discuss the issues that face Oklahomans, whether that be financial or perhaps even issues in the family. And we are at a critical point in the United States.
Yeah.
We have seen so much financial downturn. The national indebtedness has gone through the roof, trillions of dollars. And we have elected officials that refuse to uphold their duties. And there is so many issues that have to be addressed. And Oklahoma has been looking for a program that can tackle these issues. And as we have said in our promos and our commercials, we don't shy away from the tough questions. And we actually run to them so that we can bring answers to our listeners. As many folks know, I was a candidate for the Oklahoma House of Representatives last year. And through that, we gained so much experience. And then I started looking at the sacrifice that it takes to run for office. And anyone that has run for office realizes how much turmoil you have to go through and how much criticism. And during that race, I had knocked about 4,000 doors myself, and I know my campaign had knocked close to 10,000 doors total in District 43. And District 43 is in Yukon, and it also includes a portion of West Oklahoma City. Going door to door is a scary process, but I tell you what, it will inform you on what people are really concerned about. And if you really want to know what someone is concerned about, go to their door and say, hey, what do you think about your government? Whether that be on the municipal level, whether that be the state level or the national level. And once I asked them, what are you concerned about? they would always give the response that they are afraid that the identity of our nation is being stripped away. The identity of our nation, meaning what our nation used to be, it is on a decline,
I agree with that.
on a downturn.
Yes.
And so I wanted to be able to highlight leaders that have pushed through adversity and who was willing to make a difference, whether it be in their state, in their city, or in their nation, and to be able to highlight their process and to be able to bring it to our listeners this evening.
Excellent.
Now, there was a lady by the name of Aung San Suu Kyi, and she is a Burmese woman. She is 71 years old, and she is an opposition leader, meaning she fights against the government regime in Myanmar. And just recently, she's been on all of the major news outlets, on MSNBC, on Fox News, and internationally on CNN, because she is really a shaker and mover in her country. And for these nations to gain democracy, just like our nation gained democracy and separated itself from Britain a couple hundred years ago, you have to have people that are willing to step up to the plate, fight for what they believe in, and to share their message. Suu Kyi is an amazing person because of her willingness to sacrifice. Tonight I want to tell you a little bit about her. She's a lifelong resident in Burma and grew up in a powerful family. Her father actually was a general by the name of Aung San, who was a leading force in Burma's struggle to gain independence from Britain. But before we discuss Suu Kyi even more, I need to give you some background information on Burma. Myanmar, also called Burma, is a sovereign state in Southeast Asia, and it is bordered by Bangladesh, India, China, and Thailand, with about 51 million residents. Burma is also a country that has one of the longest running civil wars in world history. There's so much strife, and you'll see why there is so much civil war here later on in the program. I believe it was around in the 1960s when the military gained control of the government and established their regime, which abruptly quenched the voice of the people and stripped them of their freedom and rights. See, the nation is governed by a presidential republic as well as a bicameral legislature, meaning that Burma has a president and it has a legislature that is made up of an upper house and a lower house, very similar to how the U.S. government has a House of Representatives and a Senate. Well, lately the people of Burma were gaining traction in terms of regaining their freedom and voice, with the help of political activists such as Aung San Suu Kyi. Well, see, Suu Kyi founded the National League for Democracy in Burma. It's also referred to as NLD, in which she currently serves as the General Secretary or President of this organization. The NLD is a political party, like we have the Democrat Party or the Republican Party. And in 1900, the party was becoming so powerful that it won a substantial amount of seats in their legislature. However, the current regime ran by the military, also called the military junta, refused to accept the results of the election, and the government carried on just as the election had never occurred. I mean, this is corruption at its finest. But Suu Kyi never gave up on pushing for democracy in her nation. See, this lady was born a solid patriot. She began pursuing democracy through peaceful protest and gained the hearts of thousands of her people in Burma. They were so inspired that they joined in the fight, and she created an army of supporters. Well, pretty soon, Suu Kyi became the face of change and the face of democracy. The reigning government, or perhaps I should say the military junta, saw Suu Kyi as a major threat and put her under house arrest as quickly as they could. She spent a solid 15 years under house arrest where she gained international fame. And over those 15 years of house arrest, she studied and she practiced her skill of foreign languages. And on her downtime, she practiced Bach on the piano. Well, this past Monday, the nation of Myanmar held their elections. This was the country's first free election in 25 years. And during this election cycle, nearly all of the seats that were up for election were won by Suu Kyi's political party, the National League for Democracy, or the NLD. The NLD had won 44 out of the 45 lower seats in the legislature and all 12 of the upper seats in the legislature. It was a resounding movement that claimed the legislature. Now the power is in their hands. So naturally, one would assume that she would be next in line to be elected president. Well, she married a British man by the name of Michael Eris in 1972. However, a few years ago, the ruling party made it unconstitutional for anyone married to a foreign citizen to run for president. Now, one would assume that this ruling was intentional. It was direct and it was on purpose because they wanted to boot out Suu Kyi and they wanted to make sure that she did not run for president. Now with her chance of becoming president shot, she says that she will still function as a leading figure in the National League for Democracy. Although since the NLD has gained so much influence over the years, she will still be one of the most powerful leaders in the nation, even though she might not be able to assume the presidency. Now, many of her fellow citizens have called her the perfect leader. She was even a Nobel Peace Prize laureate for her outstanding efforts. Because she fails to give in, because she does not give up, but she continues to press forward, she is willing to make the sacrifice for her nation to win them freedom and to give them their voice back. You know, in one of Suu Kyi's recent speeches that she gave, she was quoted by saying that her people are happy now. Her people are happy because they are gaining back their voice and their freedom to vote. This reminds me of a quote that states, "The greatest sacrifice is when you sacrifice your own happiness for the sake of someone else." Aung San Suu Kyi has sacrificed years of her life and years of happiness for the sake of her people in Burma. See, we need to have more leaders like this stepping forward, not only in nations that are perhaps run by tyrannical governments, but perhaps people even here in the United States, perhaps even right here in Oklahoma City, that are willing to put forth effort, energy, and sacrifice for the betterment of their fellow people. That's why I love Suu Kyi. And I look at so many folks around the age of 71 are usually retiring. They're starting to slow things down. They're starting to focus more on themselves. But Suu Kyi, her battle is just beginning. And she's had many long battles before this. And this shows the dedication that she is willing to put forth. And if we want to see a turnaround in our nation, we have to see more people willing to step forward and sacrifice. You know, I came across a story about a guy by the name of Casey Jones. And he worked for the Illinois Central Railroad Company. He was an engineer on the Cannonball Express. Well, one foggy and rainy night on April 30th, 1900, the train was traveling through Vaughan, Mississippi. The engineers were highballing the train, meaning they were pushing the train as fast as it would go through the countryside to make up for lost time and to keep up with their schedule. Well, one of Casey's fellow engineers looked out the window, and through the foggy darkness of midnight, he noticed a passenger train stalled on the tracks ahead, and it was on the same tracks that the Cannonball Express was traveling. See, the train was going much too fast to stop, and there was an imminent collision ahead. With little time to spare, Casey commanded his crew to jump off board to safety while the train was rolling. One by one, the crew jumped off, and then Casey was the final person in line. Just before he jumped, he decided to make a last-minute, split-second, sacrificial decision, and that was to stay on board the train and to hold the brakes. See, applying the brakes would lessen the blow of impact, decreasing the amount of carnage. Well, heroically, Casey held the brakes and rode the train all the way into the fiery crash. See, if Casey hadn't have held the brakes, a trainload of passengers' lives would be jeopardized. Upon the collision, the Cannonball Express burst into flames as it hit the rear coach of the stalled passenger engine. However, there was only one death. Only one fatality was recorded, and that was Casey Jones. Since then, Casey Jones has been immortalized in song. Singers, songwriters, and artists have all written and sang songs about him in his memory, including Chris Christopherson, Pete Seeger, Marty Stewart, and even Johnny Cash. You know, the Freight Train Boogie was even written after Casey Jones and in his memory. See, Casey Jones is a symbol of sacrifice in the truest form. He gave his life. He gave all that he had for the greater good. And as I was knocking those doors in my own personal political campaign, running for State House, I got that response. They said, "We feel that our nation is running out of control, and we need somebody to put on the brakes. We need a few people like Casey Jones to step up and to simply hold the brakes, willing to make that sacrifice, willing to look past themselves and to focus on someone else." You know, there's a biblical narrative about a widow and her offering. I felt it pertinent to bring it up this evening because it's moving, it's touching, it fits right into the main point of our show tonight. And if you look in Mark chapter 12, we're introduced to a scene taking place in the local temple, the local synagogue during Jesus' time. And in fact, Jesus is included in this narrative. And it says that Jesus sat down opposite the treasury and watched as people filed by in the temple, dropping their week's tithe off into the offering plate. He watched as the men of wealth and power and stature in the community dropped their large sums of money into the offering. They were dressed in their finest clothes. However, one woman caught Jesus' attention, and she stood out. And this woman was a widow. We know back in this time that a woman could not work as freely as they do now. They had very little rights. And so if a woman had lost her husband during this day and age, then her outlook was quite grim. It would be a lifelong struggle if she didn't have anyone else to support her. So this woman had lost her husband and had no way of supporting herself. The narrative says that she walked in And as she walked into that synagogue, I could picture her wearing old tattered clothes, perhaps with patches and holes in her clothes. Perhaps she was wearing old, tired, worn-out sandals, or perhaps she had no shoes on at all. I don't know. The widow walked to the front and dropped her 2 scrawny copper coins into the offering, equating to no more than a penny by today's standards. The sight begged Jesus' notice, and immediately he commanded the disciples' attention and proclaimed, he said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything that she had to live on." I can only imagine how the men of wealth and prestige looked down upon her as she walked down the aisle. And perhaps the poor widow grew nervous. Maybe she felt intimidated. But I thought of this. Instead of picturing this woman with her head down and feeling nervous, or perhaps upset that other people were looking down on her because of her appearance or perhaps her menial offering, I instead picture her walking into that temple, into that synagogue, with her head held high, with her chin up, with her standing straight and walking right towards the treasury, with her 2 menial copper coins in her hand, because she knew she was about to give all that she had as a sacrifice. See, many times when people intentionally put all that they have into something, they do it with great pride. They do it with vigor, and they're proud. When someone gets a house, or perhaps they have a new project that they're working on, and I know a friend of mine who just bought a home, and he spends every weekend working on his home and trying to make it look perfect, and he's so proud of it. Even though it's a starter-up home, he puts all of his time and energy into it so that it will be a good place that he can reside. See, I believe when we're willing to make a sacrifice, when we're putting all that we have into a project or into the greater good, we do it with pride. Sometimes I feel like we need to be more like this widow, willing to bring forth what we have and contribute it to the greater good. Sometimes I feel that no matter how small our contribution is, we should take pride in it. And that's what our nation is lacking in today's time. And perhaps that's why some people have told me that they feel that our nation is on a decline and that we are no longer concerned about other folks, but instead we are only concerned about ourselves and our own selfishness. See, I feel that you don't have to be a highfalutin person in the community to make a big difference. You don't have to be famous. You don't have to be well known. You don't have to be intimidated by these people, but instead you can simply be just like this widow was. And you can walk into the community and bring forth the sacrifice in which you possess, in which you have, and you give it with pride. Whether that be volunteering at your local food pantry, whether that be running for your local school board or the local city council. You might say, "Hey, Jonathan, I have absolutely no experience in politics," or "I have absolutely no experience in public service." Well, you don't have to. You can make a difference in your own family. You can make a difference in your church. See, that is the element in which our nation is lacking. It is the willingness to sacrifice. But we need more people to step up to turn this trend around. We need a Casey Jones to step forward and say, "I am going to sacrifice. I'm going to turn away from my own needs and I'm going to hold on to the brakes and I'm going to slow this train down. We need to have someone like Suu Kyi willing to put forth the effort to be able to advocate for principles that are sacred to you. And I look at a scripture, and it comes from Matthew chapter 16, verse 25, and it says it perfectly. It says, "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it." We see that sacrifice is a biblical principle. And this is something that we need to not only embrace for ourselves, but to pass on to future generations.
And don't you think, Jonathan, that individual sacrifice can mean just sacrificing the first fruits of your day, or sacrificing your time in prayer? Get up an extra 30 minutes early and get on your face before God and pray. That could be your sacrifice. Maybe lose 30 minutes of sleep. I think our nation needs to get on its face before God.
Yeah, Regina, you are spot on that. And I believe, when you get up early in the morning and you set aside some time for spiritual growth,
yes, exactly.
it realigns your thought process.
Yes.
It puts in line the things that you need to focus on in the day. It lines your priorities.
Yes.
And we have a fast-paced nation that we're living in.
Yes.
And I believe many times we need to think before we act.
Yes.
But I believe putting people first,
yes.
putting others first,
yes.
is a sacred thing.
Yes.
And I believe it is a person's calling to be able to find the skills that you are good at,
yes.
and then to be able to offer that to others in service.
That's right.
Through sacrifice.
Yes.
There's great power in sacrifice, and I believe that is truly a way to find peace.
Yes.
And that is a major opportunity
yes.
to give back,
yes,
and to be at peace with yourself.
Amen.
So we want to thank everyone so much for tuning in this evening, and
yes,
we'll be back on the air Tuesday night,
yes.
tomorrow night at 7 p.m. I want to thank Regina so much for stepping in and being my co-host for this evening.
Thank you, Jonathan. I had fun.
It's always fun.
Yes.
And so we'll be seeing everybody tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Jonathan Clour. Good night.